Good evening. My name is Chase Robinson. I'm the president of the Graduate Center, and I am delighted that you can join us tonight for this conversation between Tim Marlowe of the Royal Academy of Arts and the internationally renowned artist and activist Ai Weiwei. Public programs such as this one are vital to the mission of the Graduate Center as a public institution of advanced research and learning here in New York City. Our fall calendar is filled with notables, from former Fed Chair Janet Yellen to writer Roxane Gay, and with in-depth discussions on topics from everything from artificial intelligence to the importance of the census. Last night, to give you one example, we were joined by the Nobel laureate Orhan Pamuk. The Graduate Center is indeed one of the leading PhD granting institutions in the country, and we are especially proud to rank among the country's top 10 institutions in awarding doctorates to students from underrepresented minority groups. Our doctoral program in art history is exemplary. A single example, in 2015, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation acknowledged the extraordinary quality of our colleagues in art history with a 4-year grant to deepen its long-standing commitment to training curators and other museum and arts professionals. Little wonder our students and our alumni are advancing the creative visions of the Smithsonian, of the Museum of Modern Art, the Yale University Art Gallery, the Seattle Art Museum, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and many, many more. Like tonight's guest, the Graduate Center is committed to the arts, and it is committed to activism. As a public university, we encourage our faculty and our students to advance the public good through their scholarship and their commitment to addressing issues such as inequality, immigration, climate change, and many others. Tonight, we are very proud to co-host the event with the Royal Academy of Arts in London and Royal Academy America. We're grateful, too, that we're joined by several members of our foundation board. Special thanks, I should emphasize, goes to the Center for the Humanities, who took the lead in planning tonight's event. I now have the pleasure of welcoming the Royal Academy's Director of Artistic Programs, Tim Marlowe. Tim is an art historian, a lecturer, a writer, and an arts broadcaster whose credits include the series Great Artists with Tim Marlowe and podcasts with leading contemporary artists for the BBC World Service. The Guardian has called his current position at the Royal Academy one of the most coveted visual arts jobs in the UK. Can I have it, Tim? Can I have that job? In 2015, the Royal Academy mounted a major retrospective of the work of Ai Weiwei, describing him as a visionary and radical provocateur. The exhibit chronicled his work over the 20-plus years, beginning in 1993, when he returned to China from the United States, where he had lived for more than a decade. The work drew on his vision of creative freedom, censorship, and human rights, and his examination of contemporary Chinese art and society. He was able to attend the exhibit only because the Chinese government decided to return his passport 8 weeks before the show. Ai Weiwei currently lives in Berlin and has exhibited his works all over the world. He continues to use a range of media, from architecture to installations to documentaries, all in the service of exploring society and its values. Among his many honors are the Václav Havel Prize for Creative Dissent of the Human Rights Foundation, Ambassador of Conscience Award from Amnesty International, and election as an honorary RA from the Royal Academy itself. Last year, if you walked through Washington Square Park, you saw a 40-foot high metal cage placed inside the arch. It was part of Ai Weiwei's public art exhibition with the ironic name, Good Fences Make Good Neighbors. Hundreds of works installed throughout the city that spoke to the worldwide refugee crisis and the profound impulse to divide people from each other, as he put it. The exhibition was commissioned by the Public Art Fund, and I am very pleased to tell you that another one of our students and an associate curator of the fund, Daniel Palmer, assisted on the project. Recently, Chinese authorities, without warning, demolished one of his studios just days after a new sculpture of a refugee boat was shipped to a show in Los Angeles. Commenting on an earlier destruction of artist neighborhoods and free expression in China, Ai Weiwei said, "If you are being treated unfairly, you have to let your voice out and let other people know it. You cannot just be silent." To borrow a phrase, perhaps, nevertheless, he persists. Please join me in welcoming Tim Marlowe and Ai Weiwei.
Chase, thank you very much. And just to let you all know that there'll be a chance to ask Weiwei questions from the floor, but about 7:10, ushers will be going down with cards, collecting your questions, and then we'll get a few in at the end. Weiwei, there's some images behind us which we're not talking to, but they're of the Royal Academy exhibition. And it's not to proclaim the importance of that show, but it was a very important moment for us. But it happened in a year, 2015, where after 4 years of house arrest, following 81 days of imprisonment, you hadn't seen an exhibition of yours. I think you told me at the time there were nearly 100 shows you'd made around the world that you'd not been able to see. Since then, I've counted from your CV 35, including 3 at the moment in Los Angeles, one that's just opened in Sao Paulo that I've seen the catalogue of this afternoon. You've shown in Qatar and Doha earlier this year. There's an extraordinary rhythm of creativity that you're undergoing. So I just want to give that as a context. But I want to start with what Chase has just told everyone about the demolition of your studio in Beijing. Because your studio in Shanghai was demolished by the Chinese authorities in 2011. Now in 2018, the studio in Beijing is demolished. So the first question is, does this cut, for the moment, your formal ties with China? Is there anywhere for you to go back to now in Beijing? Do you see this as a sort of end point of a particular chapter in your relationship with making work in China?
Thank you. You made it very clear. You don't speak as fast as normally you do. And I wouldn't say it will end up my relationship with China, because that relationship is beyond my understanding. You know, I'm a Chinese, my father Chinese, all the people I had, before me, they were Chinese. And at this moment, my son is in my studio in Beijing, and I just received a little video piece. He's collecting some earth for me, and he's going to bring back. You know, he's 10 years old. He's really act by his own. He think I cannot go back. And actually, my brother took him to do hot spring. So when, normally you don't take a child to there, but in Beijing it's another kind of location. So when this old man robbed my son, he's 10 years old, robbed his bag, and he said, this guy next to you is your father. My son said, no, it's not my father. My father cannot come back. So the old man says, why he cannot come back? He said, because it's not safe for him. So the old man feel very strange, why it's not safe. So my son is very surprisingly tell him, his name is Ai Weiwei, don't you think it's not safe? The man said, no, I don't know that guy, So he then said, he's the son of Ai Qing. Do you know Ai Qing? Ai Qing is my father, so he's a writer. Everybody knows him. He said, yes, I know Ai Qing. So they started communicate, He told the man, said, because Ai Weiwei is like Ai Qing. He has those ideas. The state think it's dangerous. This guy is dangerous, so he cannot come back. So he's almost 10 years old. He started to communicate. I think he's worried, and he wanted to go back to bring something back to me. He started to, to see my cats. I have about 40 cats in my studio in Beijing. I really feel very proud of, young kids like that. I start thinking what China means to him. When he was born, when he was 1 year old, I was detained. Then after I was released, every day I take him to a park. I would see secret police taking photos behind the bush. If you go to a restaurant, on the next table would be secret police. It's always next to us. But he growing up in that society, he still want to go back. He feels so much better when, he's there. He studies English as his first language, German as his second language, because we stayed in Berlin, but he still want to go back. I don't understand it, no.
That's beautiful. And you also, I remember you made a piece about the surveillance of your son, and you made a marble pushchair or stroller. And I remember you telling us again in 2015 that it was the discovery of all the photographs that the secret police had been taking that meant that you wanted to get Ai out of China. And here he is going back. It's very touching. So let's explore, because you brilliantly avoided the question about whether your own connection with China's cut, and I'll come back to that. But let's go back to your relationship with your own father. John Tancock in this catalogue writes a beautiful essay about, he calls it Born Radical. And he says that because of the experience you had as a consequence of the Cultural Revolution, being exiled to northwestern China, that you were radical from the beginning. Is that fair observation? Were you always someone who felt you must speak up?
It's really come gradually. I guess when you're a child being treated very unfairly, you don't even know it. You only think that is it's like you're standing in the rain, you get wet, So when the conditions like that, you don't feel it's really, you feel this is a part of nature of that society, so you accept it. But until you leave China, I come to United States in the 80s, then gradually you understand, okay, there can be another way of living and another kind of society. But still, I couldn't find a right moment for me to express myself. So before I have that possibility, even I understand everything still, my expression is not exist, so I couldn't find a right medium till I get on the internet. So then I realized, oh, this is fantastic. You can write down whatever you think about and to express it directly. So I start to do it, and I feel this is a miracle. And for somebody in China, everything is censored, and there's no way to express yourself. Then suddenly you have an internet. But very soon, I'd end up, I've been put in jail, I've been put in all kinds of strange conditions. So to answer you, since when I realized I was quite radical, it's really through my writings. Later, I read my writings, I said, this guy is pretty crazy, it's kind of very radical.
When did you realize that you wanted to be an artist?
I still struggle to ask myself, do I really want to become an artist? You know, it's really tough job for me now. You know, it's so yeah, I'm still not decided yet.
It's interesting that because of the range of materials that you use, in certain regards, that seems that it's a journey of discovery, that there's a richness in the found object, in the objects that you've collected and worked with, and that you've worked with everything from wood and stone to Lego and so on. But hearing you say slightly disingenuously that you're still working out if you're an artist or not, but it's profound too, makes me think that even in the way you use materials, it's still a search for something that it's a search for what you want to do or what you want to be. Do you think there's a poetic aspect to what you do that comes from your father and him being a poet, or is that too glib a way of seeing the way you use materials? Do you think you're your father's son in that way?
My father is a poet, and if I look at his way of so-called making art, or he totally opened his sense to any kind of condition. So when I use materials, it's very often it's not I choose the material, but rather I think the materials start to talk to me. And so there's always difficult conversation. And you know, it's very hard to find how to deal with those materials, because then you have to study history, you have to study how those materials being used before, you know, what kind of language and that always carry, and what kind of form it can come out from that kind of materials. But then you start to feel, this is not enough, because we're living in this very modern society. And basically, any materials has equal potential, and it's just how much you know about it, and what kind of possibilities you may give to that to give normally you say to create a new language.
Do you still feel the compulsion to work with objects that you've collected from China? Have you got material in your studio in Berlin that you will eventually work with? Or is the Chinese material from the pots that you've collected to the material from the Sichuan earthquake and so on, is that still in Beijing?
I have a habit for collecting since I went back to China in '93, because basically that time I have nothing to do. I spend every day to go to the market, and was like a golden time for collecting things. It's very cheap, it's vast, the materials come out to the market, and not everybody understands what those materials really mean, because China has been cut off from its own culture heritage for too long. And so very few people understand how valuable this material is, so you can really spend very little money to get those materials. So I started collecting, and I gradually, after maybe 6 years, concentrated study those materials from earliest foundings to Qing Dynasty. So that covers about 6,000 years, 7,000 years of material culture. I do have a very large collection. Some of them are outside, but most of them in China.
So, my inarticulately framed question, so you're still very connected to those Chinese traditions of making and of craftsmanship, and that will still be a continuing strand in your own work? You'll still work with some of those materials, that will still be part of what you do?
No, I'm already very bored about it, because you look at the history of the materials, it takes 6 years, it's quite a long time already. So you basically touched everything, every material from a silk to porcelain, bronze, or wood, and any kind of craftsmanship. in China only have maybe 20 dynasties, so it's not difficult for you to get all those to be understand. So now I stopped to collect because it's kind of boring. You repeat yourself.
Let's try and go back to that issue of Beijing and the studio ending. There was speculation in the New York Times recently that you might be moving to New York. We know your main studio now is in Berlin. The studio in Beijing has gone. Do you have a sense of where you're going to be in the next 2, 3, 4 years? Or is the nomadic life that you seem to have had in the last 3 or 4 years, which we'll come to in a minute, but traveling around the world, particularly engaging with the refugee crisis, is the nomadic life the model for the next few years?
It's kind of funny. I really gradually realized I never have a place I can call home. I have no one location I would emotionally so attached to, and I will say, okay, I want to stay here forever. Or because there's no such a place relate to my father's generation. They are being refugees, and they later become a political dissident, and then all those things. It's very normal to me. So today I still have a studio in Berlin, but my Beijing studio destroyed, and so I may think it's a moment I should move, because it's always good idea to select another place before my Berlin studio being destroyed. So
I remember talking to you about the loss of your Shanghai studio, and you made a piece, a souvenir of Shanghai, which was the fragments of the studio constructed in a rectangular, three-dimensional rectangular form around the structure of an old bed, Qing Dynasty bed. And I thought then how much you'd turned something violent into something creative and memorializing, and you didn't seem angry. I know that you always expect the unexpected, but do you feel a certain anger or frustration that your Beijing studio is destroyed? I mean, this was a place that you lived and worked in for a long time, and extraordinary work came out of it. A lot of people were employed in the studio itself. It was part of a whole community in Chaochangdi in northeast Beijing that you'd been instrumental in the architectural design of. Did that generate anger?
It should, but it doesn't, because in my life, I see generations has been destroyed. My father, whole generation, 300,000 intellectuals just being vanished within 1 year. Then Cultural Revolution, all those old things can be destroyed. Temples, Buddhist statues, or anything related to the past, or finds the porcelains and the calligraphy, painting, all being destroyed right in front of the public. So in recent days in China, I think houses being torn down, migrants being kicked around. It's very common, happens every second. So my studio, art studio being destroyed, of course it attached to me, because in past 12 years, most of my works, major works are being made there. But I don't feel that sad about it. It's one of the places being destroyed.
The idea that you're not sure where you feel at home, I think, is a very powerful one. The idea that your son, who's had experience of Beijing but has grown up in the last 5 years in Berlin, wants to go back is interesting too. Do you think that you will ever put down roots? I use that word quite specifically because that's the title of the exhibition in Sao Paulo. Or are you saying that it really does seem that for the next decade or 2 or 3 of your life, you have no sense of wanting to be rooted somewhere?
Well, I never had the experience to be rooted. It's always before it's been real rooted, it's been pulled out, and it's sometimes it's thrown to a dry land. Sometimes you survive well. So I'm always ready to be pulled out. So
let's talk a little now about the refugee crisis, because there was a kind of coincidence of you getting your passport back in 2015, coming to Europe, coming to Berlin to see your son and the studio that had been set up in your absence there, coming to London for the Royal Academy show. And then I remember there was a walk that you did with Anish Kapoor in support of the refugees across London. And then, I'm summarizing, then off you went eventually to Lesbos, where you set up a studio, having started to engage with that crisis. Was that something that you were aware of from China over the previous 3, 4, 5 years, or was it something that actually it was only by leaving China that you suddenly became aware of what was going on, and this became something that fueled your art?
We made the refugee film in 2015, 2016, but by 2014 I was still in China in self-detention. We sent two of our studio colleagues to Iraq, a camp in Iraq, those refugee camp, to find out who the refugee is. And we made videos and interviews, hundreds interviews, and long videos and films, trying to just find out who those people are and why they become a refugee, and it's camp in northern Iraq. And it's purely for my political curiosity, what is the future of those people. But not too long after I get my passport, I can travel. So I just continuously to try to find out what is really happening in the world. I need to know.
What have you learned from those travels? What have you learned from making Human Flow?
At the beginning, I always bring my son with me, so we traveled to Lesbos on the shore, and I told him it's a vacation. It's a beautiful place for vacation especially around Christmas time. Germany is pretty dark and cold. So, but on the shore, this very beautiful, sunny day like New York today, but the ocean is so blue. Then suddenly I see a boat approaching us, with the people on the boat with orange life jacket. I was kind of shocked. Even they are coming from there. That's what I prepared to go to there to see them, how they arrive. But I used to hear about a snake. It's very different to see a snake. It's right there. I was totally shocked. So that second, I decided why I have to have a studio in Berlin. I should move my studio to here, because see the people coming down and boat after boat, especially after midnight. Sometimes you see 30 boat approaching. All those women and the baby crying. They all wet. They all come from very unfamiliar culture and religion, and they just trying to escape. And so many people that at the journey. So I said that this has to be recorded. This has to be recorded. I started recording with my iPhone. I called my studio. So we always have a tradition to document things. So that's when we start to make the film. But of course, I soon realized the problem is much larger than just Syrian refugees. You have a history of refugees. You have refugees in the world with very different reason and different background. So we went to 23 nations, include Africa or Bangladesh and Iraq, Pakistan, and West Bank, Gaza, all those locations, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey. So it brings me to 40 different kind of camps, and I did interview 600 people, and that's a price you pay for learning, for your curiosity.
Does it feel overwhelming and futile to encounter the scale of the refugee problem? Or do you have enough optimism and hope in human nature, having met these people, many of them, the individual people? You were constantly talking about understanding and hearing individual voices, not seeing them lumped together as a kind of mass. Do you see there's a glimmer of hope for humanity because of their fortitude? Or, okay, in summary, the question, does it make everything seem rather futile when you encounter the scale of the refugee crisis? Does art seem futile?
Well, you talk about future.
They're futile, sorry, almost pointless, that art can't change the way that we engage with these crises.
My approach is quite selfish. It's for my personal learning. You know, I have to have my understanding and perspective about what kind of world we live in. Then it's really about how I would understand the situation. So it's very simple. If you're not there, you're not facing those people, you're not to stay a period of time to see how they pass the night, how they stand in the rain, how they would make their some food, or those children and women, or how can they go to the bathroom or take a shower, all those very, very simple things. You will never understand the situation. You have to, so until you're facing them, you realize they're just like you or your sister or your baby. They're very, very essential humanity there. So then you start questioning who put them in that kind of condition, why people cannot accept them, why people put all kind of discrimination and dirty names on those already very vulnerable, victims. There's about 70 million of those people, being forced out of their home. They all had home before. So nobody wanted to go to another place. It's almost impossible for people, even escaped, to have a real life in, the new location.
There's a lovely moment, there are many lovely moments in Human Flow, where you speak to a refugee, a man, and you get him to show him his passport, and you show him yours, and you swap, and he tells you of his life and you tell him of yours briefly. And it's touching and it's humorous, but then it's tragic because you're going to have to get your passport back and he's going to have his passport back. And even though you've reached out and empathized, that's it. He's back to what he was as an anonymous figure in a refugee camp, and you go back to your journey of self-discovery. Do you regret anything about that encounter? When you look at it now, does it's touching, but it's also, one could say it's kind of pointless or futile or potentially even patronizing, because he's not going to get out and he's never going to be swap lives with you.
But how do you know I'm not him? Or how do you know that?
How do I know you're not him?
Yeah, how do you know?
Well, because you're here and who knows where he is.
So I don't think you really know, and also you don't know I'm still there. Change your subject, please.
No, I think we should need to go on with this, but yeah, you floored me.
Try to speak Arabic to me.
Yes. There was also a moment where you, on the shores of Lesbos, you had yourself photographed in the pose of Alan Kurdi, the young Kurdish boy who drowned. And that was, there was a lot of controversy over that, but it doesn't matter what my personal opinion was, but there was a lot of controversy over it. you, I think quite rightly said you were empathizing, you were trying to engage with something and actually trying to put yourself in that position, which is part of, I suppose, what our slightly gnomic exchange was about the man and the passport. Are you surprised by the public reaction to some of the things you do? I mean, what I'm really getting at is that you're now a celebrated international artist and activist. Do you have to think about the way things will play out publicly?
Do you think if I do care about those kind of crime, I can become artist like today? You think I still can survive? You know, I don't give a damn shit about those things.
Yeah, I think that's borne out by most of your career, yeah. So let's talk about what you do care about, which is this ongoing exploration of trying to understand. I certainly would never expect you to come up with an answer as to how we might solve the problems of global refugee crisis, but I'm curious as to what you've learned, having experienced the scale of the problem. And we talked a little bit about it earlier. But do you think it is possible for a global solution, given the rise of nationalism and xenophobia and suspicion? Do you still believe that humanity can sort this problem out?
This is very simple. You know, it's always come to this kind of questions. You know, how do we solve it? Because we are a society, always believe we can solve things. You know, we're rational, we're scientifically developed, we have so much potential in past 100 years that push us to believe we can solve things. You know, it's a problem created by human, you know, it's really human tragic condition, and it can be easily solved by ourselves. But the question rather, do we really want to solve it? You know, if you still know US just still pushing, selling, 110 billion weapons to Saudi. British also sell at least 5 billion, to Saudi. When Germany says, let's stop selling those weapons, British and France and the US will never agree with it. So this kind of, it's so obvious. It makes us feel stupid even to talk on stage like this. Everybody knows what's the problem. Everybody knows weapon made for killing. Everybody knows those weapons should not be sold to those kind of society. I think it's an insult to our public, our intellect, to think we don't understand this, or we just pretend we don't understand this. We just pretend those consequences has nothing to do with us. We have been selfish, narrow-minded, and we have been so corrupt. The whole society is so corrupted. We just pretend we are not a be part of it. Come on, This is, I don't think we need even to talk about it. It'll make we all in deep shame.
One of the ways that people feel that the world can change and that people can either wake up or admit to the kind of issues that you talk about.
It always can change, it's just we don't want it to change,
Well, one of the ways will be education. So I am going to change subject briefly, but we'll certainly come back to it. And this is a public university. The Royal Academy is an academy of artists, and it has schools in it. So let's think a little about the education of people in general, but artists in particular. What about your own education as an artist? You spent time here at Parsons, but before that you were you were in Beijing at film school. Did you learn a great deal at art school, or did you learn more when you weren't at art school? I mean, how did that play out for you?
If I did learn anything, my education, I never completed my education, and my education was stopped. I was studying in Parsons for half a year, but only because the tuition I have to drop out, so I never really finished my university. So if China, as a communist society, if that society have a high tuition. I would never even to have any education. So we know the education in here, in state, you have to pay so much for education. And people accept it. But that whole system, I think, is questionable. Why people have to pay for education. It's just very simple. People have to very basic human rights to gain the knowledge and to be informed. And still, you still have to pay. And because you have to pay, in school you already have this kind of class. Which school you're going to and which club you belongs to, and of course, what kind of language you talk about. So this whole education system itself has a problem, So if we don't want to solve those problems, then the conclusion is also very obvious. It's not difficult to imagine.
Who have you learnt most from then? Let's talk artists first, but let's talk others as well. Which artists have you learnt most from?
You. You're even laughing about it.
I am. I don't think you've learnt anything from me. I've certainly learnt from you. Sean Scully, who isn't here tonight, sadly, was your teacher at Parsons for a time, and he claims a certain amount of credit, but he's very funny about it too. And he was one of your teachers. You also said that Duchamp, although he wasn't alive at the time, but Duchamp was perhaps someone you learnt a vast amount from, encountering him through Jasper Johns, actually, or Jasper Johns' work here. So they would be two possible artists. But do you learn still from the art that you encounter around the world, or does your activism and the experience of, say, the refugee crisis that we've just been talking about mean that you're not looking so much at art anymore?
Since around 93, I moved back to China. So I said I spent about 6 years in looking back what human has created by, in different period. So since then, I haven't looked at contemporary art, and I have enough knowledge about contemporary art. Actually, I waste too much time on contemporary art. So, and I paid a lot of attention to other things like architecture or art or design or life or cooking or just cutting people's hair or something like that. But I no longer to go to galleries or museums.
But you're very much part of the art world, as well as being outside of it. You've shown in, as I said, 35 major museums or institutions in the last 5 years and 100 or so before that. So is the art world a means to an end for you?
Well, it's an existing institution. It's like you walk on the road. I mean, the road is already there. You cross the river, the bridge is already there. It's not I admire how the bridge is being made. It's just it's just a bridge. You don't want to get wet. You just cross it.
Yeah, that's a good answer. But there's still something about the context in which museums and institutions frame art and which artists can critique or reframe art that potentially makes people see things in slightly different ways. Presumably that still appeals to you. It's not just a bridge or a means to something else.
Not so much, because life itself is so fresh. If you really grow vegetables, you not so appreciate vegetables selling in the market, in the supermarket. But you are in the field. You can really just pull out those vegetables from on the earth, and that gave me so much joy.
What about the art market? Is that a means of for you to actually be able to fund the projects you want to do? It sustains you. It's a way of earning a living.
The art market is I should say, it's very strange, because you really realize that piece of thing can sell. It could be on paper or it could be on canvas, but of course it can have a very strong spiritual value. But to sell that price is a little bit, it's kind of ironic. But still, it provides me you know, I'm not against it. You know, I'm very profited by it, but it gave me a possibility to make a more so-called ambitious work. It's not really ambitious, it just made it big, or, you know, more people get involved, but it should stop somewhere because it's not really interesting.
I think I'll be the judge of that, or we will, but I think it is interesting. But do you, I mean, you said earlier that in Beijing, Ailao, your son, met a man who didn't know who you were. And I'm certain that there's plenty of people in China who don't know who you are. But having been in China with you and gone for meals or drinks, there are a lot of people who do know who you are, who did know who you were, and who know who you are now. Do you think that your work has made a difference in any significant way to the way people are or perceive human rights or freedom of speech in China?
Yes, I do, and you know, you often see someone stop you there, just a vendor or taxi driver will say, "Okay, I like your work." I said, "Why you like my work?" He said, "You know, you keep doing good works because you speak out for us." Or, you know, I was very surprised, you know, to hear things like that. But this is very often you walk on the street, you become, you know, yesterday in Soho area, I see a carpenter, a young man, you know, the whole dress is full of this kind of paint, or just very dirty, and he want to take a selfie, you know, he said, you know, I like your work. So I'm always touched by people sincerely, you know, to speak out about their mind or heart. And I think that's very important. That's worth. Just make all the work for that person is already worth something.
Yeah. It's interesting, when Straight, which was the piece you made from the debris of the Sichuan earthquake from 2008, when that was, which is 75 tons of rebar, straightened out in this amazing wave-like pattern, but on a kind of minimalist grid. When that was shown at the Royal Academy, there were people in tears in that exhibition, and it was partly the naming of the children on the wall, but it was the power of this material that they felt somehow had borne witness to a tragedy, and this was an extraordinary memorial. That work, I know you've just installed in Sao Paulo, but it's also been shown in Brooklyn, it's been shown in Washington, you told me, and in Tokyo. Does that work in particular, and your work in general, do you find it has a kind of universal resonance, or do different countries, different cities react differently to that piece?
I think that certain works can really survive in very different culture, like Sunflower Seeds I made in China, it showed in Tate. And when I show it in Israel, the people start to pick it up. I said, no, you cannot touch it. But after later, we measured 500 kilos that disappeared. And they really think that's their sunflower seeds. You know, Israel people think that way. They think, that's my sunflower seeds. I said, okay, it's your sunflower seeds. Then we showed in Turkey, and Turkish people said, that's our sunflower seeds. You know, we love the sunflower seeds. And then, okay, now we're showing in Brazil. We have this kind of surveillance sensor. You know, if you go close, it will make beep, beep, you know, the sound. So I guess Brazil also think that's their sunflower seeds. The same as this street, you know, it's a rebar. It's an iron rebar which crashed from one high school. 1,700 high school students' life lost because it's badly built building. It takes us about 2 years to secretly collecting those rebars. At the beginning, we don't know what am I going to do with those rebars, 150 tons. But we do know we should collect this as evidence because it will be melted in the factory. Then people forget about those things. And since those 1,700 students will not exist, the memory of them will not exist. So I had this internet movement, we call it respect life, never forget. But never forget, we still need a form, we still need evidence, we still need a clear calculation about what's their name, what's their birthday, which school collapsed. So we did all that. So the last, when I look at the rebars, I said, why don't we just straighten it out? So it's a huge amount. So I was detained. After the detention, I come back to my studio and realize people still working there. I hear people are really punching those, make a very beautiful sound, just to try to straighten those rebars. So that's the work come out like almost I did nothing to it. The rebar come out from factory, it's like that, so.
Yeah, it's an extraordinarily powerful piece, though, both through its history and through the process and through the scale. We were very proud that we installed 75 tons of it in our Beaux-Arts galleries in London and didn't collapse onto the irony of ironies, the Royal Academy schools below. But you just told me that before this talk that you said you just showed the completed version in Sao Paulo, which is 150 tons. So we're feeling slightly emasculated at the Academy as a consequence of this. I've got some questions from the floor. I'll come to them in 1 minute. I wanted to ask you one other question before we take the floor questions, Weiwei, which is, again, another extraordinary piece, Sacred, which these were 6 blocks, inside of which were resin, I call them vignettes, but scenes of your life in the 81 days that you were incarcerated. And I remember asking you whether or not this was something that in your mind, as you were in prison, this was a work you knew you were going to do. And you explained to me, which I'd like to expand on, that wasn't how it was. It was more a question of keeping your sanity. Just explain how that work evolved, but also I'd love to know how you see it now, whether that work, Sacred, has almost supplanted your memory of what incarceration was like, or whether it remains detached from it.
When I was in detention, I have to make my mind a little bit detached from the situation, because the situation is so severe and so unreal, because you have 2 soldiers standing closer than or distant and look at you at all time, 24 hours a day, and speak nothing. And I cannot sit like this. I have to sit very, straight like this. So the whole situation is not very normal. It's not normal at all. So, but still, I can still use my eye to remember every inch of the room. So that become my daily practice. How long the room, how wide, and how many tiles, and how high the ceiling is. I try to calculate, because I'm an architect, and I even remember those wallpapers behind those soft cushions. They put soft cushions all around you to provide you commit suicide. But it's really intimidating because I never think or thought about to commit suicide. Why I have to commit suicide? They should commit suicide. That's always in my mind. But I remember every detail. But I never really think I can be released, because they talk about 13 years, talk about my crime. I already believe I deserve to be put in there 13 years. Maybe I can get on 11 years, 2 years later, but suddenly they said, get out. So, so after I get out, then the problem become even bigger because everybody want to know what's it like inside. So I have such a responsibility to tell people, but it's very hard to tell people what's it like. You know, language doesn't really serve in many circumstances. That's why art jumps out. You know, you can really create that you have the language, and easily for me to just to remake this room. So my mom went to Venice. Well, that time I still cannot travel. She looked at the window. I know how she feels, you know, to see his son's life experience. That's why my mom, if today I called her, she said, never come back. She's, you know, almost 90, ill, but she said, never come back, please. So I said, okay. So I sent my son, go to there just to see him for 10 days. You know, those things are real. It's not unreal. It's, you know, all the details are so real. It connects to our happy moment, and also it reflects on our most unthinkable conditions. So that's why I made those works. You know, it's not, it's still, after I make those works, nobody asks me how it's look like anymore. So it's still very selfish need, you know.
Do you, I mean, you must have felt fear at that time because you didn't know whether you would be charged, and it could have been a lifetime. Ai Weiwei's gone back to China for a brief period of time, and I mean, you presumably must have had confidence that he wouldn't be detained. Do you have fears, or is that not the way that you allow yourself to proceed? Because I think some people have pointed out that, you know, your life could have been in jeopardy, but you still made art. You still felt the compulsion to make art. Do you feel vulnerable?
Of course, I feel vulnerable. I think all life are vulnerable, even without this kind of condition. You know, we are facing all kind of danger any moment, and I don't have a fear. You know, I somehow maybe I don't feel that much fear, and also I don't feel that much love. You know, I'm a little bit stupid in that way. But I'm quite cautious, you know, I'm a very cautious person. I can see what would lead to next stage and what without, you know, it's all about the different stages.
Yeah, I wouldn't call someone who took on the Chinese state with his art cautious, but anyway, I know what you mean. You think certain things through. There are questions from the floor. I'm going to go through some of these, Weiwei, because there's some interesting ones. It might relate to what we've just been talking about, given that that sacred was partly a way of holding on to your mind. It's kind of a form of meditation. But it says, do you have any religious practices, or do you believe in some kind of God?
I definitely believe some kind of a God, but I still don't know what kind, you know.
Is art a surrogate religion? Not for you, but for many, do you think?
I think for many is, or pretend is. Very, very often I say it's a pretend is, but I should be.
It should be.
Should be religious. You know, any best moment in art, in poetry or in art, we get some religious feeling from it.
Right. I'm doing this randomly. If you could have dinner with one person, who would it be?
I tell you the truth, I never really have a dish with one person, not my girlfriend, not my mom, not my son. I always invite a lot of people to have a dish because it's easy to order. You know, in Chinese, we need... It's true, I never had one dish. Oh, you know.
That's terrific. That's like Gilbert and George being asked, what would happen if one of them died? And they said, what do you mean? And they said, well, if one of you got run over. And they said, well, we always cross the road together. It's kind of a brilliant avoiding of the question, but wonderful. I mean, I could ask you which 5 people, but let's stick to the question. You said one person. Brilliant, right. What advice would you have for young activists who use arts to reimagine how people can live without oppression? And then it's especially here in the US, given the current climate. So what advice would you have for young activists who want to use arts to reimagine how people can live without oppression?
I can't answer it. It's not something I can answer, really.
To follow their own research, to find out more for themselves, to be brave?
I think they should not really just work for ideology. They should work for themselves. They should work to question what their life would be like if they don't fight for very basic dignity of life, or they forget about those very essential happiness or sadness, what kind of human being they will be. So I think it's very sad you already think you're an activist or artist. I think very often it's a failure. You cannot just think you're an artist or activist.
I can see how the two are inextricably linked for you. You've been, I think, quite critical of certain artists and writers in China who haven't been politically engaged, or those who have been lauded by the authorities for essentially being complicit in oppression. Do you still feel strongly about that, that there are many people who, I mean, more artists should speak out in oppressive or oppressed societies?
Well, it's disappointment if you think writers or artists are not protect the most important quality of their life, which is search for the truth and find a language to express it. Those are already a very difficult job, but people just giving this up and pretend they're writers or artists. What a shame. Today's world can be very dramatic. Just within very short time, China, this actress, she probably knows nothing about political situation, but being secretly detained. She's the most famous Chinese actress. I never watched her, what she played, but it's the most, but within very short time, the head of the public security been calling back from Paris and been secretly detained also. So you have a society like that, and then you have news, journalists been calling into Saudi embassy, and the rest, I think everybody know, but still ask you, who did it, and apologize or something. But nobody asks, where's the body? Doesn't matter who did it, where's the body? Just tell us where's the body. But, the world is like that. It's a very strange world.
One or two journalists already started. I remember reading an interview with the Art newspaper recently where they pointed out that you'd shown recently in Doha, I hope that works though, Doha, Istanbul, and Jerusalem. And so they said, for example, 3 countries where the attitudes to human rights have been questions, sort of crackdowns in those countries. And did you feel compromised showing there? And you gave a very interesting answer.
I think you feel compromised by not showing that, just to say, okay, I'm out of it. I think to really be there, to let your voice to be heard, to community, trust the people, trust the humanity, and still make an effort in difficult situation. I try to communicate all those secret police who detained me. They visit me every day. We have to have a conversation. I will always give them very sincere conversation, much more sincere than I do here. It's true, because I believe they understand my language. They should. Why shouldn't they? Or do I shy about my beliefs? Or do I have any excuse not to express what's deeply in my heart to another human being? So I think that, for me, is very successful.
Yeah. Are there any countries on principle in the world that you wouldn't show in?
United States, Britain. Yeah, if I cannot show in Israel, why show in United States? Why show in Britain? I mean, those nations doesn't do much better than other places.
I think the way situations now, I don't think we can argue with that. Quite right. Okay. Is there a type of new technology that excites you? Is there an old form of technology that excites you? Don't say yes and no.
Yes. Yes. It's always, any sort of a new technology or technologies so benefit us so much.
But specifically, are there new technologies, artificial intelligence, that excite you, or you're curious and open to all new technologies? I'm
curious to all, whatever is can be called new. I'm very curious about it.
Okay, sorry, that was a good question. I tried twice, but there you go. You included scenes of solitary animals in Human Flow. What drew you to those animals and to film them?
Well, I pronounce first. My next film is about animals. I really think it's such a tragic when humans have a tragics. Women, children, animals are the most victimized, and those people have nothing to do with our politics or our ambitious ideology, but they are most always being victimized. So now I'm making another film about animals' relations to human. What is the true relations through history, through different kind of religion, or different kind of culture, how we see ourselves, how our relationships to animals. So it's very, very fascinating.
Is this global? Will you be traveling extensively?
Yeah, same scale as Human Flow, maybe even bigger.
And you've been writing a book, a kind of memoir about your father and life with your father. How is that coming on? How close to publishing is that?
It's finished, but it's the editor. You go to publisher. Publisher will say today, this morning, this is part of my trip. I made them. They think take another 2 years to editing. So you just have to wait.
Okay. Last question from the floor, two-parter. How many languages do you speak, and what language do you dream in?
Speechless,
Very good. That's a good note on which nearly
Thank
to end.
you. Thanks so much.
No, you're not getting off yet. I've got one more question to ask you from me. You're doing a new film. There's a book to be published. I know there are many museum and institutional shows that, there are many institutional shows that are being lined up for you. Do you see your career in? Yeah, let's get.
I always record the last question.
Yeah, I always record the last question. You can see your career in certain sections, certain moments. Having finished Human Flow, do you see yourself entering in a new phase of your career? Or is it going to be, for the next few years, a continuation of what you're doing now? More filming, more museum projects?
Well, this is a very typical Western question. You're being cut like, salad or main course or dinner or dessert, So for Chinese, we eat all the time, we don't have that kind of problem,
On which gnomic and humorous and absurdist note, but very profound too, we should end. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Ai Weiwei. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Joy Connolly. I'm the Provost of the Graduate Center, and I have the unenviable task of giving you just a couple of closing remarks after, unenviable only because it's such a difficult conversation to follow. Exactly. Well, I want to thank Tim Marlowe for his wonderful, agile questions. And to Ai Weiwei for his brilliantly thoughtful responses and also his presence here, which we're very grateful for. And also I want to thank him for his art and above all for his example. And as a classicist, I kind of spend my time in a literature that is all about the power of literature and art itself to generate moral exemplars for us readers or viewers or listeners in this case to learn from. So I just want to share with you some terms to leave us with for tonight that I have in my mind after listening to this hour of conversation that are the exemplar that Ai Weiwei has left us with. Endurance, generosity, curiosity, sympathy, acute attentiveness to injustice, a drive to document, sensitivity to matters of the body and life as we live it, and to suffering, courage, honesty, whimsicality, which we saw just now, sense of perspective, insight into what is worth looking at in everyday life, a sense of freshness, strength, radical openness. All of this really modeling a habit of being. And I'll leave you with one final thought, one final memory of mine from tonight. At a certain point in the conversation, Ai Weiwei said, I try continuously to find out always what is happening in the world. And a few minutes later you said, my approach is really quite selfish. It's about my personal learning. And I was left thinking, would that all our personal journeys of self-discovery yield so much provocation and so much good in the world. So thank you, Ai Weiwei, and thank you all for coming. Good night.